Eagles Entertainment.
With the 10th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by Life Brand. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. It's time to get you ready for another week of college football, and we've got 4 people on today's show to help me do exactly that. First up, from Mr. Relevant, I'm going to talk with Crissy Froyd from the Draft Network. She does great work for Sports Illustrated covering Mississippi State. You can follow her on Twitter at Crissy_Froyd. She's going to stop by to talk about how she views this quarterback class. And she does a great job ranking all the quarterbacks every single week over at the Draft Network. So we'll dive into her quarterback rankings right at the top of the show. After that, we've got Scouting Report, where I catch up with Eric Galko, the Director of Football Operations and Player Personnel at the Shrine Bowl, to talk about one of the guys who has helped his stock the most here this season, one of the top senior edge rushers in this class. That's Jermaine Johnson from Florida State. We'll do that with Eric there in Scouting Report. Then we transition into This Week in College Football with Ben Fennell. We've got our matchups to watch, who's got the most to gain. Obviously, some big ones here this week, especially in the quarterback class. Also, a new mock draft to break down from over at Pro Football Focus. Then myself and Ross Tucker, we wrap things up with our Pick Six. We've got some big games to pick here in This Week in College Football. As always, make sure you head on over to Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating, leave us a review. If you've got a question, we will answer it. If you've got a mock draft, we will break it down every single week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. That said, let's get things started here. Excited to catch up with Crissy Froyd for Mr. Relevant.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
We're really excited this week to be joined on the Journey to the Draft podcast by Crissy Froyd, who you can follow on Twitter at Crissy_Froyd. Her work over at Sports Illustrated covering Mississippi State, the Draft Network covering the NFL Draft and the quarterback class. You make sure you go check out Crissy's work. And I want to talk first, Crissy, about an article you just posted recently. You've been updating everybody almost pretty regularly about your top 25 draft eligible quarterbacks. Your most recent list came out. So I want to go through this with you today.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we do that weekly at the Draft Network. So I'd say every Saturday and Sunday is kind of a mad rush to watch everybody and just kind of see what's going on. And it's a lot to handle, but it's a fun deal to do. That's for sure.
Sure. And it's a fun class because there are a lot of names, and we like to call it on the show, we like to call it QB Boggle, because depending on who you talk to, everybody's got a different way that they're sorting all these players. And so my thought was, all right, let's just go through your top 5, and then I'll ask you a couple follow-ups here on the back end. And we'll start with number 5 in your list, and that's Sam Howell from North Carolina. What is it you like most about Sam Howell as a future NFL quarterback?
Yeah, I think he's steady. I think that he has a certain level of consistency just as a passer. But at the same time, it's been hard to evaluate him to me because his supporting cast has had so many struggles. It's kind of this conversation of, is Sam Howell going to be good whenever he doesn't have all the pieces around him that he needs, or if they're not playing at a high level? And one of the articles that I published on the rankings, I said, is he what I call a good weather quarterback? Like, is he going to only be good when the weather is good, meaning the offensive line, the supporting cast, all of that? But I think that they've seen some more success just offensively in general whenever they use Sam Howell both in the air and on the ground. I like a lot of what he does on the ground. I mean, that's not my favorite area to evaluate quarterbacks in, because I hold pretty fast to the idea that they should be passers first and foremost. But there are things I like about him as a passer, and I think that kind of 1-2 punch of using him almost equally as a passer and a runner has worked well, and it's something that can help him in the modern NFL for sure.
Yeah, and I love what you said there at the end, because it's a perfect transition to your number 4 quarterback, and that's Malik Willis from Liberty. Arguably the best physical tools in this class, just such a dynamic athlete. Obviously, the arm talent is there as well. Where do you want to see Malik Willis grow most going into the NFL?
I just want to see steady consistency and just explosiveness from him as a passer, which really I was wary of him toward the beginning of the season, because I was like, all right, he's one of those guys that has all this raw athletic ability and can do all these things, and kind of a do-it-all guy, which I've evaluated several do-it-all guys that most of the time what it ends up being is they can do a lot of stuff on the ground. There's a lot of physical stuff that jumps out at you, but when it comes time to throw the ball on a regular basis, it's kind of just falls apart. So toward the beginning of the season, as he went on, I was like, okay, this is a guy that is legitimately a rare prospect, can do a lot on the ground, can do a lot physically, but is also just as good of a passer. And for a while, he looked like that. And then he hit this really weird, that 2-game stretch against lower level competition and threw three interceptions in back-to-back games. So 3 interception per game, which to me was very alarming. And I mean, this is not against a super good secondary. I mean, these are teams you're supposed to be blowing out of the water, and one of them they got beat by. So to me, that was kind of scared me away from him for a second. And then it seems like he's getting his feet back under him. And I mean, if it was just a fluke, then yeah, he's absolutely one of the better quarterback prospects in this class. It just, if he ever does that again, I'm going to become a little bit wary of him. But I mean, as far as like his ability to extend plays, just some of the stuff that he does is just rare, and it's things that can't be taught. So if we're talking about the can't be taught aspects of a quarterback, he's the best quarterback in this class.
And really an interesting week for him, right? Because you watch a lot of SEC, you watch obviously a lot of quarterbacks, and Malik Willis going up against Ole Miss this week. How do you foresee this matchup playing out? You've studied a lot of both sides of the coin here.
Yeah, I think that Ole Miss's soft spot is that their defense is not always particularly playing at a high level. I think that they rely more on an explosive offense than anything. And then if Matt Corral is out, I mean, he's been it seems like he's basically been battling injury for the past couple of weeks. Like, he's still been in and out of the game. But it's clear, like, that one touchdown run that he had, he was definitely running on 2 bad ankles. And you could just tell that he wasn't quite himself. So I think that whether or not Corral is able to play is going to make a huge difference. How much the Ole Miss defense shows up to play, and then how much Malik Willis can take care of the football. I think it's going to be a really close game either way. But I mean, it seems most logical to give the edge to Ole Miss, and I think that I do. But at the same time, if Corral is out and Willis starts playing at a high level, you just never really know.
Well, let's transition to your number 3 quarterback, and that is Matt Corral, a player that has done a lot this season in terms of trying to escalate his stock just a redshirt junior. What excites you most about Matt Corral and his game right now?
I'd say the level of accuracy and just how much of a difference maker that he is for that team. I mean, to me, he is the heart and soul of that offense. And then he, on a much higher level to me than Sam Howell has done, can do a lot for you both in the air and on the ground. I mean, we've seen him finish out. There was that one game that I think he had almost 200 rushing yards. It's just, even if you're down, you're never out with Matt Corral. I mean, he's always brings the heroics. It wasn't enough to beat Auburn, but granted that he did have some injury issues during Auburn. But I like a lot of things that he does as far as using his mobility, both to evade pressure, to make plays on his own, and just his ability to get things done the majority of the time for this offense. I don't think that this offense would be nearly as strong as it is without him there.
Yeah, he's definitely opened a lot of eyes for sure with his performance so far this season, especially fighting through the adversity with these injuries, as you've mentioned. Let's get now to number 2 on your list, and that's Kenny Pickett. A lot of people have talked about his rise over the last few weeks and what he's done here in his super senior season. You've been in on him for a bit now. What is it that you like most about Kenny Pickett?
Yeah, thank you for recognizing that, because it was kind of funny to me after I turned him off at number 6, and a lot of people were like, "Who's that? Why are you doing that?" And then after a while, it seemed like it started to become a very popular opinion. Now people have him as high as number 1, which I'm close to putting him there, but I'm not there yet. No, he just, a lot of his game reminds me of Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow, in a way, has become a sort of a measuring stick for me that I use, because I covered Joe Burrow in person for about a little over 2 years. So it's the ability to kind of use this kind of a mobility. I wouldn't call it, like, no one ever really referred to Joe Burrow as a super mobile quarterback. And I don't really view Kenny as that either, but they use that mobility to me in a very similar way to get out of bad situations, to sometimes go out and get the job done with their legs themselves. They're not Lamar Jackson or anything, but they definitely can use it for something. Just the accuracy at all levels of the field, the NFL level throws. He does play in a pro style offense. So, I mean, it's not, when we look at these huge numbers he's putting up, they're not just because he's passing the ball down to some really good receivers in an offense that passes the ball all the time. Because sometimes you'll see that a little bit, which to me, it could still be indicative of success, but a lot of people have this weird thing where they don't like to look at high numbers because they think that they're inflated or something. But anyway, so I mean, it's just the fact that he's just like Matt Corral. He's been a difference maker within his offense, and all those numbers that he was putting up, they look like video game numbers, but they're real, and the tape backs them up. And he wouldn't have risen like this for no reason if they weren't. And so I see a lot of similar qualities between him and Joe Burrow, and really even intangibly speaking. I mean, these are two guys that I've had conversations with both of them, and I kind of see a similar mindset and just approach to things, which is a lot more important than a lot of people might think. It's amazing how underrated the face-to-face just conversation interview is when it comes to evaluating these guys,
no
especially
doubt,
when it comes to character, etc.
And that's why this is the case at every position when it comes to the NFL draft, but especially at quarterback, when you're talking through those in-person experiences with teams, whether it's at the Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl, if it's that at the Combine, the Pro Day, the visits, all of those things has such a huge impact on the evaluation and how these guys ultimately get slotted. The last guy I want to ask you about individually is Carson Strong. He is your top quarterback at this point in this draft class. What is it that sets Carson apart from the rest of his peers?
Well, one of the things to me that's always the most impressive about a passer when it comes to accuracy is, where do they get the accuracy from? I mean, where are they throwing the ball to? How many people are they throwing the ball to? That kind of thing. And so Carson's not just making these little check down throws, though he can do that too. I mean, he can make throws over the middle of the field, to both sides of the field. But the biggest thing to me is the deep ball. And I've said over and over again that he has the best deep ball in this class. And I mean, these are some really long shots that he's taking down the field, and his receivers don't always have 7 steps on the defender. I mean, they've got some good ones over there, but it's not always like that. And then a lot of these throws are also made down the sideline. And to me, there is hardly a more difficult throw for a quarterback to make than one that is into a tight window to a receiver directly down the sideline. And he does that every single game. It's almost become like a joke of a tradition to me that every time that we put him in the rankings, it's like, here's your Carson Strong deep ball to the sideline update, because it's just money every single time. And just his ability too to lead the team. I mean, you look at the near comeback that they staged against Fresno State, which is a ranked opponent. And I'm kind of surprised that Nevada hasn't cracked into anyone's rankings at all, and maybe they do later on. But that game, they were down by a pretty decent margin, and then they finally got in a position to tie it up, to go down the field, get a touchdown, and that 2-point conversion to tie it up. And so that was a matter of like less than 50 seconds. I think that they started from their own 10 and marched all the way down the field with Carson Strong's arm and got the touchdown. And they technically got the 2-point conversion, but Romeo Doubs didn't get a foot down in the end zone, but Carson Strong put it where it was supposed to be. And so, I mean, if that had worked out, that's a huge comeback win. And how many quarterbacks can drive down the field and have just that level of accuracy and wherewithal to do that 90 yards in 50 seconds? We're in a situation where a lot of people, I think, would have probably just kind of mentally given up a little bit. And then it has a very high level of mental processing, very quick. You get the sense that he knows where people are going to be and what's going to happen before the ball gets snapped. And I mean, I've studied air raid quarterbacks for a long time, and people would be surprised by, even though it seems like a more simplistic offense, just the sheer amount that's required from the quarterback. And when it comes down to like their final season, some air raid teams like have them like calling the plays, and so they become like a coach on the field. So there is a lot of responsibility, and to be that accurate and have that much success whenever you're throwing the ball that many times, it's just because you're an air raid quarterback doesn't mean you're going to have these huge numbers and do well. There are plenty of air raid quarterbacks that are not good, that do not put up good numbers. So that's kind of my quibble with people that think that just because they're in that system, that it's like helping them out a lot and making them look better.
Of course. And what I always found interesting about Carson Strong is there are so many air raid concepts within the structure of that offense, but you'll still, going back and watching him over the summer, it's like, oh, well, here he is under center and doing things that you don't typically see from an air raid quarterback, but just the meshing of all the different offensive minds they've got in that building, I find to be really, really fascinating. And I think that Carson Strong does kind of suffer from some of the East Coast bias. If he's playing, at Coastal Carolina or a mid-major school, a group of 5 school that's not out in the Midwest or out there on the West Coast, I think that maybe his star shines a little bit brighter. But really, really fun player, and I'm glad to see that you think so highly of him. Let me ask you this question: is there a guy outside of that group, outside of that top 5, that you think could potentially rise in your rankings by the time we get to April?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very wide open quarterback class,
Sure.
and we've already seen so much shifting literally within a quarterback class where there was no proclaimed number 1 really at any point in time. I like Bailey Zapp a lot, especially watching more of him, talking to his coaches more. I think that Sam Hartman, a big game upcoming for him in Wake Forest, but I mean, he's done a really good job. A lot of good things in the air at all levels of field and on the ground, like a lot of these guys that are in the top 10 have done. And then with Bailey, he plays in kind of a modified air raid system over there at Western Kentucky. So basically, he came from a school where they ran more of like a traditional air raid, and he had all those really good passing ability going on, and all of that stuff, was able to make all the throws in a pass-happy offense. And then they kind of added at Western Kentucky, whenever they went over there with Helton, that offensive coordinator did, they added kind of more of a run aspect there, and they put a lot of emphasis on understanding and changing protections, and he's intensively trained in that. And I mean, when I talked to Tyson Helton, he was extremely high on him. He said that, and I'm sure you saw the comments before, he said that he had coached Sam Darnold before, and he was like, Sam Darnold probably wishes he was playing at the level of Bailey Zapp. And so I think that he sees a lot of Sam Darnold and Bailey Zapp, but there are expansions upon it that make him even more special.
Very interesting. A name that whenever I bring somebody on, I say, who's the next quarterback for you? Bailey comes up almost all the time. It's so funny that he's like that next guy after that first year. And my last question for you: is there a younger quarterback outside of these 5 that you're high on? And maybe they're draft eligible, but redshirt sophomore, true junior, that we're not hearing too much about them coming into this draft, but someone we need to keep in mind for the future?
Well, I mean, I think the obvious whenever you're looking at next year's draft is somebody like CJ Stroud. Continue to keep an eye on guys like Caleb Williams, just guys that have gotten in there and have done some good things in unlikely situations. So I'd probably say those 2. I know that those are a little bit more obvious, but those are the ones that I'm watching. And I'm also curious to see how, I know that LSU has a lot going on right now in the worst of ways, but I'm curious to see how their quarterback room does over there. Like Garrett Nussmeier, whenever I was covering LSU, which I just stopped covering LSU earlier this year, I thought that he had the highest ceiling out of all of them and was probably the best high school player interview in terms of maturity and just understanding that I've ever done. Because I've always been extremely impressed with him. And then Max Johnson has also done a lot of good things over there. And I think that he's kind of fallen victim not only to the growing pains, but just to all the terrible things going on both on and off the field at LSU. So I would like to see him in more of a fair environment next year. And then Will Rogers over here at Mississippi State's a little bit up and down, but he's put up some really good numbers lately. Just broke a record this past weekend. So if he continues to progress at a high level in this offense, I think that he could evolve into one to watch as well.
Very interesting. Well, Crissy, we will have you on in the future to talk about some of these guys down the road. Really appreciate you taking some time to join us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, and we will talk to you soon.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the scouting report.
Well, excited to be joined by the Shrine Bowl's Director of Football Operations, Eric Galko, to talk through an interesting pass rusher here in Florida State's Jermaine Johnson. Eric, welcome back, man.
Appreciate it, man.
So let's talk through Jermaine Johnson, a guy that he's had a very interesting pathway here to the NFL draft circle in terms of he started his career at junior college. He was at Independence Community College, which was the last season of Last Chance U, goes out to Georgia, and then ends up transferring to Florida State this past year. So interested to kind of see, when did he get on your radar, just because of the interesting journey he has taken to this point in his development?
Yeah, I mean, any player, as we've learned, especially this year, any player that plays in the Georgia defensive front seven with Kirby Smart there, you have to kind of pay attention and know who they are, because the next man up is going to be a star. And I think Jermaine was on our radar there for sure. But I think really for me, obviously knowing after his Georgia tape that he was going to be a possible NFL player and a good one at that, talking to Florida State and people around that program this offseason, just speaking how much he quickly became a leader of that team, how quickly he was able to emerge as one of the defensive pillars of that team as a new player coming there. I think it speaks to like his character and his still growth. And a guy that's been in college now, junior college, Georgia and Florida State now for 5 years, to have a guy with that much talent who's still ascending despite that age is really exciting, because there's not many guys that after 5 years can still get a lot better. And Jermaine Johnson, as we'll talk about, he's a top 100 pick who could get a lot better in the NFL, which is really exciting for scouts.
Yeah, I mean, 6'5", 260 pounds. Started 4 games in the previous 2 seasons for the Georgia Bulldogs. So interested to get your sense of a scouting report here with Jermaine Johnson and what he brings to the table.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Jermaine Johnson, if you're watching him this year, he's played the best at probably their most important games this season. He is a highly athletic outside rusher who can rip inside. He can work on the perimeter. He can be a bull rush straight up, and he's got a lot of length to work with, to work as a versatile perimeter pass rusher. He'll also do some hook, curl, flat stuff for them as well, and can do a 3-4 outside linebacker role sufficiently in the NFL. But he's going to be at his best as a pass rusher. And for me, as a rusher, especially secondary and finishing on the quarterback or the running back, outstanding hands to finish as a tackler. You saw in the Clemson game, I think I posted on social media earlier this week, his strip sack for a touchdown. That's not an accident. He knows what he's doing with his hands as a rusher as he makes a play on the ball. And for a guy who's had 10.5 tackles for a loss so far this year, and a lot of those coming against the best teams they've played this year, it just shows that he knows when to step up and be a good situational pass rusher. And he's a guy that, again, sky's the limit for his potential. Even in a loaded edge rusher class, he's going to be a top 50, 75 pick with the tools to go even much higher.
So my last question for you, and just talking about Jermaine Johnson, is this, and this goes for all transfer players. And we know that with the transfer portal, a lot of transfer players every single year in the NFL draft. We've had decision makers on the show. I know Andy Weidel. I asked him about this when I spoke to Landon Dickerson coming out in this previous draft. When you have a player who transfers, how interesting is it to kind of sort through not just one set of sources at one school, but then have a whole nother set of sources? So, if you're trying to pick a guy to come to the Shrine Bowl to join you in Las Vegas, and you're trying to talk with people, is it hard? Does it make it harder? Does it make it easier? What is that process like when you're dealing with a guy that's coming from 2 different programs?
Yeah, I mean, Jermaine Johnson's one. Isaiah Graham Mobley's a linebacker at Boston College from Temple. To use Arnold Ebiketie coming from Temple to Penn State. It's actually great to talk to the schools they're at now and see how they're adapting, and then see if that translates and see, hey, did you leave this past school on good terms? Because for all 3 of those guys, the school has spoken so highly organically, bringing them up how they're being leaders, not forcing it, which is always great to hear for all 3 of those players. And then you go back to their previous school and kind of work backwards. And yes, they were a leader there. Hey, they left on unbelievable terms. They left for a better opportunity or a new role, a new opportunity as well. And I think the biggest thing for evaluators is to make sure your guys are still growing, right? I always remind our young scouts, hey, every player in the draft, there's maybe 3 or 4 guys who are able to start in the NFL right away. All of these guys have to get better. And sometimes for transfers or 5th or 6th year players, you worry, are they kind of maxed out ceiling wise? I think for those 3 guys I mentioned, including Jermaine Johnson, the fact that they have a great reputation at their previous school and at their new school, and they're still ascending as people as well as players, it gets you really excited. So I think that the journey is important to follow. Again, I like going backwards to front, where they're at right now versus where they were before, and then kind of seeing that story kind of fits the whole way. And I think Jermaine Johnson fits that to a T. Again, he's personally and as a football player on the field, still getting better as a player. And as an edge rusher with that kind of talent, guys still ascending is really exciting.
Love that. Well, Eric, I think you painted the picture for us here on Jermaine Johnson, a guy we will certainly be following through the rest of the pre-draft process. We will talk to you next week, man.
Thanks, man.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, time to dive into this week in college football as I welcome in Ben Fennell. And Ben, we had a couple more Shrine Game announcements here as we get into that part of the calendar year where we start talking about some of these All-Star Game acceptances. Shrine Bowl invitations have already gone out. Senior Bowl invitations about to go out. So we'll start having a lot more of these announcements every single week here on the show. A couple players I wanted to hit on with you. First, I know a player that you've done in Memphis wide receiver Calvin Austin, and a player that I've done in Middle Tennessee State safety Reed Blankenship. I'll let you hit on Austin, and I'll jump in on Blankenship.
Yeah, we're into November now. So Nagy, Galko, get those invites out. We're watching and we're waiting. But Calvin Austin, receiver out of Memphis, as explosive as it gets across the country. Track star receiver, but it comes in a pretty small frame at 5'9", just a smidge over 160 pounds. Had a huge 2020. I think a couple of the guys opted out. I'm blanking on the name of the one receiver who had opted out, but he took huge, great advantage of that. 16 yards a catch on 139 career catches. Really just a 2-year player out there, but has been very productive and a guy that can win vertically.
Yeah, and Reed Blankenship from MTSU, 6'1", 200 pounds. This guy's played a ton of football. I mean, nearly 3,000 snaps coming into the season. Has been really productive. He's been a guy that's played some special teams for them. He's a smart zone coverage player, some limited athletic traits, I think. But this is a guy that's been really reliable coming downhill as a tackler. I think you're probably looking at a safe bet as a backup on the back end of a secondary depth chart.
Yeah, 5-year starter, huge early years at Middle Tennessee State there, 2017, 2018, had 6 picks, a bunch of block kicks. Thought he was a little bit average in 2020. The missed tackling started to pile up a little bit, but his experience now with 3,600 snaps played, defense, special teams, there really isn't another player across the country that's as experienced as far as on-field time as Reed Blankenship.
Yeah, that's a really well-accomplished college career for sure. All right, let's get into some of our matchups here for this week. And I'm going to take one focusing in on a player that you've talked about a lot and just how productive he has been in the SEC. Missouri running back Tyler Beatty, really fun player. Eric Galko was on the show I would say this was early in the season, like week 2, week 3, gave us a full scouting report. You've obviously, like I said, I've talked about him a lot, a really dynamic athlete at the position. He's been a kind of a steady presence as a complementary piece to Larry Roundtree before this season. Now with Roundtree off to the LA Chargers, Beatty now the full-time back for the Tigers, and he is just so fun to watch. He's been so productive this season, almost every game as a runner and as a receiver, going up against this vaunted Georgia defense, right? So it'll be tough for Beatty to reach the end zone, but when you get those one-on-one opportunities in space against Nakobe Dean, the Georgia linebacker that a lot of people are really, really high on, I think that'll be a really fun matchup to study. Now, Georgia, they mix up their coverages. They'll play a lot of zone. They'll play some man. And there have been times where I've watched Nakobe Dean kind of travel out with some satellite backs if teams go empty. So we'll see if that situation does pop up in this game. Beatty is a player that I think can win in space against Nakobe Dean, but that should be a fun matchup to watch. Even when Dean's coming downhill in the hole, Beatty is a shifty, elusive player, and Dean has had some missed tackles here in this season. So that'll be something I'll be watching here in Missouri versus Georgia.
And Tyler Beatty last year in that game generated 0 yards. Had 2 catches for no yards, and I think only 1 rushing attempt, if I'm not mistaken. So a pretty quiet day. And I know he'd love to put that Georgia defense, give him kind of a signature performance against them on his way out of Missouri.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. Is there a matchup that you like here this week?
Yeah, Fran, doesn't this feel like one of the least hyped LSU Alabama games in recent memory? It doesn't feel right, but it doesn't feel right if I don't mention a matchup here. So I'm going to go with a top 10 pick against a guy that's not eligible, and that's Big Evan Neal against BJ Ojulari, who I think will be a blue chip type of player in a year or two, not quite eligible. He's only a sophomore, younger brother of Azeez Ojulari, but he's a guy that wins with speed, power, he's active, and he's a matchup that may give a bigger size tackle like Evan Neal some problems with his looseness and flexibility. So BJ rushes a lot off that left side. I hope they kick him off to the right side and we see some elite versus elite matchups.
How do you view Evan Neal projecting to the NFL? There are some people that kind of view him is he a guard? Is he a right tackle only? Obviously, he's played a couple different positions over the course of his career. That versatility will help him. Interested to kind of get your thoughts on how you view him, how you project him moving to the NFL. What kind of tier do you view him landing when he gets into the league?
He is a massive sized tackle, and I think there have been some tackles in a similar mold lately that may make it more appropriate to fit in the NFL, whether it's maybe a slightly sloppier Orlando Brown or Mekhi Becton. It might be a more apropos, comparison. So I think it's going to be a preference based on your GM, your scheme fit, your offensive coordinator, and what you ask your tackle to do. I don't think Evan Neal is the most athletic of tackles, comparatively to some of the freak tackles that are across college football and the NFL. So it may be scheme specific. Some teams may view him as a potential Pro Bowl guard. And some say, you know what, we don't ask our tackles to do a lot in space. He could really just be that anchor down the left side. I think it's going to be different strokes for different folks, but a guy that I think any offensive line room would welcome in with open arms.
All right, well, let's get to our next one here with our most to gain. And this is one that, honestly, when we started doing this category in the beginning of the season, I don't know that there was one pick that was more obvious than this one all season long. And that's Liberty quarterback Malik Willis going up against Ole Miss. It's a game, a matchup that people have had circled on their calendars going back to the spring when people were starting to really kind of build up steam here on Malik Willis. I don't want to say it's make or break, obviously, because there are a lot of layers to a quarterback evaluation and so much tape out there already on Malik Willis. But this is an opportunity for him on a big stage against an SEC opponent. Obviously, you have the Hugh Freeze element here, too, right? A little bit of a revenge game for Hugh Freeze going up against his old team. But I think when you look at Willis, this is one of those games where if he struggles, that might be a little bit hard to rebound from looking at the rest of the quarterback class. If he goes up and lights up Ole Miss and has a really impressive performance, that's something that he can build upon going into not just the rest of the season, but more importantly for him long-term going into the spring. And I think that this performance, huge opportunity here for Malik Willis to kind of cement himself. Because as we talked about it earlier with Crissy, she sees him as her fourth quarterback. Nate Tice last week had him as his QB4 as well. But there are plenty of others out there that have him as QB1 or QB2, right? So with it being as murky as it is from a quarterback picture standpoint, having a performance like this against an SEC opponent for Malik Willis, that will be huge for his overall draft stock.
Yeah, certainly a game I think we all circled in the summer, just kind of forecasting Malik Willis' season, his stock, and just looking for that one tape against the best competition. And yeah, a little bit of a rivalry game for Malik Willis as well, being the Auburn transfer, gets to go up against some SEC opponents here in Ole Miss. But Fran, we got two interesting undefeated teams on the road this week. I haven't mentioned Wake Forest or Michigan State once this year, so we got to give them some attention. They're both on the road, though. So I just want to give you some defensive players that could maybe spoil their season.
Okay.
So you got Wake Forest heading to North Carolina, and they have some dogs out in the secondary in North Carolina. Not winning a lot of games this year, but cornerback Tony Grimes and safety Cameron Kelly make a lot of plays on the back end. Don't forget, Tony Grimes, #1 corner out of high school a couple years ago by many services. So if he gets his hands on a couple passes from Sam Hartman, could spoil their season and end the Cinderella campaign by Wake Forest. Michigan State, they're traveling to Purdue. I think we all know about edge George Karlaftis at this point. He has a chance to ruin any game. He's a good run-pass defender. But, Fran, they have two massive linebackers. Jalen Alexander and Kieran Douglas are each 240. They look 250. I'm telling you, they buckle their chin strap, and they're ready to hit Kenneth Walker this week. So I think there are a lot of defensive players on the other side of these teams that can really spoil the undefeated seasons of Michigan State and Wake Forest.
A little bit of a teaser. We're picking the North Carolina Wake Forest game coming up in the next segment with Ross. Who do you like in that one? Do you think Wake is able to pull it off? I mean, because a lot of people view North Carolina as the ability to upset Wake here.
I think North Carolina is going to end this Cinderella campaign. It's tough to win on the road, especially these teams that really know each other. I know North Carolina hasn't had the season they expected with Sam Hartman, but I think they right the ship this week and put the first L in the loss column for Wake Forest.
Well, I'll save my pick for the next segment. I'm going to bounce this one back to you, though, for our prospects after dark, a player who is lining up in a game that starts 7:30 or later Saturday night. So someone that we could profile for playing in the later game. Who do you like here in this one?
Well, I know you love to talk Power 5 and SEC and the top of college football, but UTSA, Fran, is undefeated.
They've got players.
They're number 16 in the AP poll. So let's talk about some prospects on this team because they got them on both sides of the ball. Running back Sincere McCormick, 5'9", 205. He had 1,400 yards last year. Reminds me a little bit of like a Ronnie Hillman. He's short but rocked up. Zone runner, creative, has some make and miss. And in that secondary, safety Rashad Wisdom, where's number 0? He looks to take your head off. He's that short, rocked up thumper over the middle. And Tariq Woolen at corner, converted receiver at 6'4", 210.
Yep.
Freakless player for a 4.3 laser time 40 at 6'4". Woo, they got something cooking out there in that defensive secondary. So Rashad Wisdom at safety, Woolen at corner, Sincere McCormick. UTSA is 8-0, 16 in the AP poll. Good for them. Having a great year.
And the thing with Tariq Woolen is like the speed, the 4.3 times speed. Sometimes you watch a guy and you're like, I don't know if that shows up. Like that speed shows up with Tariq Woolen on defense. The big thing, you just want to be able to see things a little bit faster, just be more consistent as a tackler. But when you're 6'4" and you run 4.3, that is a traits position. That is a stopwatch position when you talk about draft stock, right? So Tariq Woolen not being talked about as like, could he go like, potentially like early day 2? Could he go into round 3? Like we've seen corners every single year get overdrafted because of traits. And so I would not count that out with Tariq Woolen from UTSA.
Yeah, and I guess just to round out the prospect after dark category, they're heading to UTEP, 10:15 ESPN2 Saturday night. So UTSA heading to UTEP. It is a prospect after dark game, and there's plenty of them. They got a great logo out there, the Road Runners. UTSA is a fun team to watch. Give them a couple hours on your Saturday night.
I like it. I'm going to go. I'm going to stay in the secondary and talk about just Indiana and Taiwan Mullen. He's been battling this foot injury. He's been out for a bunch of the year. It looks like he'll be okay to go this week against Michigan. 7:30 on Fox. So the big game on Fox on Saturday night. Obviously, plenty of reasons to watch this game from a Michigan standpoint. Certainly, Aiden Hutchinson, potential top 10 pick in this draft, coming off the edge. But keep an eye on Indiana. You've talked about a bunch of guys on that defense, whether it's Micah McFadden at linebacker, some other guys in that secondary, but Taiwan Mullen is a player certainly to keep an eye out for. Top 50 type of player by pretty much for everybody that you talk to. So Taiwan Mullen, Michigan, hopefully now healthy, coming off that foot injury. Someone to watch here. 7:30 on Fox Saturday night. Let's now get into our future film focus, a game or a matchup that we can't wait to go back and study later. Just knowing that we can't always see everything on TV. I'll bounce this one back to you.
So I actually want to see Auburn safety Smoke Monday. Auburn's playing Texas A&M this week. Texas A&M throws a lot of different things at you over the middle of the field, not only the running game with Isaiah Spiller, but Aeneas Smith, Jalen Weidermeyer, big tight end down the middle. Smoke Monday, I did not like his 2020 tape. I thought he missed tons of tackles. I thought he had eye violations. Well, 2021, he cleaned it up. He's looking good out there. And I think this could be kind of a signature game as far as watching tapes and elite opponents and making sure he brings down those ball carriers. You take proper angles. You look good in coverage. A&M really likes to attack you kind of between the numbers.
I'm going to stay in the SEC because I actually have not done Smoke Monday yet. So I'm interested. He's one of the guys that's like next on my list. I want to make sure I get to soon.
He had too many missed tackles last year, Fran. I would refuse to call him Smoke. He was Steam Monday last year. He's earning the Smoke Monday this year.
I like it. All right. Well, I'm going to stay. You talked about Mississippi State corner Martin Emerson last week on the show. What was who was the comp that you had for Martin Emerson? I'm trying to remember.
At times he had the feistiness in the flat of like a Jalen Ramsey, but I think a much more appropriate comp was Trayvon Diggs.
That's right.
Who both 6'2", 200 pounds, physical, high cut, little stiff hipped at times.
Okay, so going up against Arkansas wide receiver Traylon Burks. Two physical marvels at the position, right? Two of the more physically imposing players at their positions in the league in the country, much less the SEC. So this is one when I was trying to remember who that comp was. I knew you had a big physical corner in line for Emerson, but just watching him and Traylon Burks go one-on-one at times in this game, that is going to be a lot of fun. I don't know that we'll always see it on the TV copy. I think that some of these SEC games have gotten pretty good on the broadcast angles of showing more all 22. But I will say, just going back and watching the tape here of Emerson versus Burks, that is going to be a fun matchup to watch.
So that's one you need to watch them on the backside of the run game.
Right.
They're two. The word finesse doesn't show up on either of their reports.
Right.
So that's kind of what you're getting with those two.
No doubt. So I alluded to last week, you had that comparison for Martin Emerson. Let's get into our comparison chat here. Using an NFL comp to profile a player that's taking the field this weekend, I will let you go first on this one.
So I enjoyed watching some film with you last week. We were both kind of peeping at Jamison Williams from Alabama, and I'm stuck between two style of receivers right now, but I'm okay with writing them both down. Jamison Williams, I think, is an electric route runner, really loose, creative. Reminds you a little bit of a Chad Johnson as a throwback, but really not that different from a Justin Jefferson.
Right.
I thought coming at LSU. A little bit, taller and upright of a slot presence at times. Really quick in and out of breaks, can sink his hips, can roll out of speed cuts, and really do anything you want as far as a route runner. And I think that's what Justin Jefferson did. Now, the big thing is, what is Williams going to time? How is he going to test? think me and you were pretty impressed with his movement patterns, his speed, his ability to get up to top velocity almost instantly. He may be a quick riser right now, which he's kind of cracked a lot of top 10s we've seen. He may be cracking top 10 receivers, maybe cracking the top 5 receiver group pretty consistently and consensusly once we head into the spring.
That's the thing. It's like when you watch Williams, all the tools are there for him to be that kind of player. And some of the routes, were just wicked what he was able to do to defenders up at the second level. I just want to see more consistency in that area from him. I don't think we saw a ball hit the ground watching him. And you mentioned, the size, the ability to get downfield, the movements is really, really impressive for a guy that big. The consistency as a route runner and with his release package, I do want to see. But this guy, he was really, really fun to watch. I'm going to go to the other side of the ball for me. I'm going to go to Logan Hall. This is a guy that got a little bit of buzz over the offseason, coming into the year after his teammate was a surprise first-round pick by the New Orleans Saints a year ago. I think when you look at Logan Hall, he's kind of in that DN, D-tackle hybrid, right? That a few years ago, he would have been viewed as that tweener. Well, I look at it now, and everybody's looking for these kinds of players. And, he's played both D-tackle and defensive end for Houston over the course of his career. Two guys I wrote down after watching him. Quentin Jefferson, who you and I have studied just recently, obviously playing now for the Raiders, and he's just a really disruptive player on the inside. And then Lawrence Guy with the New England Patriots, another guy who can be, he could do a lot of different things for you in terms of being a space eater up front or making sure that he can be disruptive on the other side of the line of scrimmage. Logan Hall has that combo skill set, and some teams all teams are going to view him differently. Some might value him more than others, but for the teams that do value, look for that kind of combo skill set, they're going to regard Logan Hall very, very highly. And then the speed in pursuit, the pure explosiveness, really, really impressive from this kid.
Yeah, kind of a really unique player in that I think his height works a little bit against him. He's 6'6", every bit of 6'6", maybe even pushing 6'7". Yeah. He has that William Golson, really tall, broad frame that just seems like he struggles to get his pads down. Has a nice club arm over move that he seems to go to a lot, makes guards just fall on their face. I wrote down some throwback names here too. Okay. I remember Matthias Kiwanuka, coming out and with the Giants was able to kind of play inside, outside, another guy that was taller, really good run pass defender.
They had him as a Sam linebacker for a large chunk of his career too. He was
played all over the place, but he was tall too. He was 6'6", 267 coming out of Boston College. Logan Hall seems to be in that kind of ballpark. He could be a guy that some teams want on the edge full time, or maybe a guy that, just creates his home at 3-tech. So a versatile player.
No doubt. All right, let's round this out now with our mock draft roundup. We've looked at a lot of big boards. I think the last 3 weeks we'll get back into the mock draft game here as we go to Mike Renner from Pro Football Focus, who this week put out a new mock draft. And he's got the Eagles with 3 first-round picks, all of them in the top 9. So I thought, all right, rather than go pick by pick, let's just look at this top 10 and we'll react to the picks as we go. Some of these are chalk. Some of these we've seen, have kind of come universal. But let's talk through some of these combinations here. The Detroit Lions at number 1, going with Oregon pass rusher Kayvon Thibodeau. That seems to be a very popular pick at this point. Number 2, the Houston Texans taking Michigan pass rusher Aiden Hutchinson. Certainly an interesting pick there, especially with the season that Hutchinson has put together. Eagles at number 3 take LSU corner Derek Stingley. Number 4, Jacksonville Jaguars taking Kyle Hamilton from Notre Dame, the star safety. Washington football team at number 5 taking Matt Corral, the quarterback from Ole Miss. So Matt Corral, first quarterback off the board there for Mike Renner. At number 6, we already talked about Evan Neal, the tackle from Alabama. He goes to the New York Jets. Number 7, here's your center, Ben. You talked last week, I believe, about could Tyler Linderbaum be the highest drafted center that we've seen? Well, he goes to the Giants here at 7 overall. Then the Eagles get back-to-back picks. George Karlaftis, the stud pass rusher from Purdue, at number 8. And then Liberty quarterback Malik Willis at number 9. So 2 quarterbacks there in the top 10. And then DeMarvin Leal going to the Jets at number 10. So, Ben, Derek Stingley, George Karlaftis, Malik Willis. How excited should Eagles fans be with that kind of trio? I honestly, if the Eagles end up with 3 picks in the top 9, it's tough to have a bad combination here. I think there's a lot to be excited, no matter how you kind of boggle these names together.
Yeah, that would be an exciting haul. If you have 3 in the top 10, throw 3 darts at a top 20 board, and I think we're going to hit on one of them and be excited about 2 of them. But just going through the top 10 really fast for my thoughts, Kayvon Thibodeau joined his old teammate, Penny Sewell out there in Detroit. Aiden Hutchinson, a guy I've kind of cloned to maybe a poor man's J.J. Watt, going back out to Houston for their next series of that. Yep. Derek Stingley, and then to see Kyle Hamilton next at 4, I would almost want to flip those. I think Kyle Hamilton in Philadelphia at that safety spot and can do a lot of different things on the back end, down in the box, running the alley, playmaking ability. If we're still going to be playing a lot of zone coverage out here, do you want this dynamic press man corner in Derek Stingley?
Yeah, you and I have been studying the Chargers for the last 2 weeks, and you've been studying them a lot this year with CBS. And Kyle Hamilton, it's tough. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but seeing the impact that Derwin James has with that Chargers team, having a safety that can cover ground like that and be that kind of force against the run, and still a matchup player in coverage and being what he is as a top down pass defender, that's a really, really intriguing proposition.
Yeah, and Washington getting their quarterback of the future, Matt Corral. Happy for him. Hope it works out.
Good fit for that scheme.
The Jets getting Evan Neal. I'm petitioning the league to not allow Evan Neal and Mekhi Becton on the same offensive line. That should not be allowed.
And Vera Tucker. Yep.
Linderbaum going to the Giants. Giants fans are going to throw out the analytics crowd again, taking running backs, interior linemen, trading up for Daniel Jones. I'd imagine they'll be frustrated with the pick, but I think Linderbaum will be a long-term starter. I mean, Carl Laftis and Malik Willis back-to-back. Pretty exciting. You get a quarterback and a stud pass rushing, run presence as well. And Carl Laftis, who's a great, well-rounded player. And then DeMarvin Leal going to the Jets. The Jets have 2 top 10 picks too.
Yeah.
Both going with the trenches.
On the trade back, yeah. The Jamal Adams trade.
Yeah, adding into the trenches on both sides. So I think that's the Joe Douglas style.
Do you think Leal, picturing him in that Robert Saleh defense, I guess like like an Arik Armstead kind of fit, right? Where maybe he lines up off the edge and then, passing downs, you want to try and bump him inside?
Yeah, that's what you would think. They need 3 down players up there in that New York front 7. They need guys that are tough run players that can still get after the passer and maybe a little bit of positional versatility. Leal can play up and down the line.
Yeah, so there are definitely some interesting fits there in the top 10. When we dive outside the top 10, though, was there one player or team fit that you liked most outside of the top 10?
Yeah, I really like seeing Treylon Burks to the Packers. Yeah. I think adding that kind of yak presence, thicker receiver, gadget receiver to Matt LaFleur's RPO offense would be a great complementative skill set to Devontae Adams and Aaron Jones, X, Y, and Z. And one other one I'm going to throw in there, Fran, which I don't think this team is getting a lot of credit up front, the Cincinnati Bengals. Jonah Williams is playing great, Quentin Speen at left guard, and they're going to get Kenyon Green into that offensive line, plug him into maybe even center or right guard for the next, 5-6 years, protecting for Joe Burrow. They are nasty up front there. Joe Mixon out there. The Bengals are looking good. Really excited to see Zach Taylor get that leash and kind of time to grow and figure things out. It wasn't pretty that first year. He was head coach and they got the number 1 pick.
Yep.
Yeah. Then they got Joe Burrow. He got hurt last year. Well, the Bengals are rolling right now. It's just great to see him kind of emerge on the other side. That's a really fun team.
I do like the Treylon Burks fit with the Packers, especially when you talk about that offense. It's almost like, obviously to a lesser extent, but they drafted Amari Rodgers in the 3rd round this past year, and you kind of envision that Deebo Samuel kind of role in that offense, and where that comes from. And when you look at Treylon Burks, there's a reason why I have Deebo as one of those comps for him, because he can be used that way. And we've seen Deebo Samuel making plays at all 3 levels of the field for the 49ers this year, and I think Burks has that kind of potential as well. For me, I really liked Kenny Pickett staying in the Steel City and going to the Steelers. I do kind of like that fit, especially the way that they're structured right now with Ben Roethlisberger is that, hey, everything's kind of structured through the pocket. And if you want to try and continue to play that way, maybe you could kind of pluck Kenny Pickett in, and you're hopefully going to get a little bit more than what you're getting out of Roethlisberger at this point in his career, but you can kind of keep the train moving. It's not going to require a drastic overhaul in what you're doing offensively. So I do kind of like that pick and that fit there for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last question, biggest steal in round 1. Which one really kind of caught you off and you're like, oh man, like getting him at this spot, that's a great value for this team?
Well, if Ahmad Gardner is falling to 24, 23 is going to have teams running to the board to go trade up for this guy, because there's no way he's falling to 24 in my opinion. So if he does fall to 24 to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they should be approaching the podium with a ski mask on, because that is highway robbery. And Ahmad Gardner is not being challenged a lot this year out in the secondary. Yeah. So he may be a little quiet because nobody's throwing his way. And he is a through and through island shutdown corner as there is in college football. So Ahmad Gardner, 24, I don't believe it, but that'd be a steal.
absolutely travesty, by the way, that Cincinnati's not in the top 4 in these initial playoff rankings. Well, that's a conversation for another day. I am going to stay at the cornerback spot as well. Andrew Booth is a guy I've been a big fan of, and going to Buffalo, I guess, look, I also love the scheme fit, and that's part of it. But Booth going to a team like that, that's an outstanding get for Buffalo late in the first round. Andrew Booth, the young, still green corner from Clemson, who not only has the ball skills and those traits, but also his ferocity downhill and his competitiveness in the run game. That would make for a perfect fit in that scheme. But this is a guy I think is more top end of round 1 as opposed to back end of round 1. So good stuff there from our buddy Mike Renner, as always, over with Pro Football Focus. Ben, we are going to recap everything that we see this week in college football with yourself and with Dane Brugler next Monday. Until then, man, enjoy the weekend, and we will talk to you next week.
Now it's time for Pick 6.
All right, let's wrap the show up here with my friend Ross Tucker for Pick 6. And Ross, I picked up one game on you last week. You still have a 4-game lead, but just for a quick refresher, I took the under on 3.5 touchdowns for your boy Sam Hartman from Wake Forest against Duke. You took the over. It did land at 3, so I won that one. I picked NC State over Louisville. That game got me an extra point. You took Kenneth Walker and his yards per carry against the Michigan margin, and you got a point there. But both of our upset picks fell way short for the first time this year. I don't even want to get into those games because those games got ugly fast. But let's get into this week's games, man. We mentioned Wake Forest. There was a game that you did a couple weeks ago against Army and one of the bigger shootouts of the college football season. We'll talk through them once again here. Wake Forest against the in-state rival North Carolina. A lot of people think North Carolina's got a shot in this game. Who do you like here in this one, Ross?
Well, North Carolina definitely has a shot in this game. They typically recruit better players than Wake Forest. If you look at any of the recruiting rankings, the difference is a lot of North Carolina's best players left last year. I mean, several receivers, obviously both running backs, Javonte Williams, Michael Carter. They just had a mass exodus. They haven't played as well. And you know who else hasn't played as well? Sam Howell. He hasn't played as well as Sam Hartman. I think Wake Forest has the better Sam H in this game. I'm going to take Wake Forest to get it done.
I'm going to go the opposite. I'm going to try and see if I can make some ground up on you here. I'm going to go North Carolina. I feel like it's kind of setting up where everybody's like, oh, well, how could North Carolina be favored here? And it's going, and I feel like everything's going to go towards Wake. I'm going to go toward North Carolina. Mac Brown has come up in some big games for the Tar Heels since he's been back in Chapel Hill. I'll go UNC here and go opposite of you, although Wake Forest has been a really great story so far this year. Let's go to the SEC for our next one. Another pick 'em. Tennessee and Kentucky. Both schools have had some big wins. Both have had some tough losses. Who do you like here in this one?
Yeah, I'm going to go I'll go Kentucky. I've got some faith in Stoops and company, Will Levis at quarterback, and with that defense. I don't have a strong feeling on this, but it just feels like, hype will still kind of getting Tennessee going, whereas Kentucky's a little bit further along.
I am actually going to go Kentucky as well. A lot of faith in that offense with Will Levis and Wan'Dale Robinson and Rodriguez and that whole group. So I will go with Kentucky here. You and I on the same side for that one. Let's go to our over-under and the number. This one's going to be a fun one, man. 5.5 is the number. And that is going to be the number of knockdowns from NC State left tackle Ikem Ekwonu against Florida State. And Ross, I'm sure you've seen some highlights out there of Ekwonu. If you haven't already done a game of Ekwanu's film, dude, he is a trained killer at the point of attack in the run game. He loves to get guys on the ground. The way we will judge, we're not going to go off of the school stat or anything like that. We're going to have our buddy Ben Fennell go through the film on Sunday morning. He will be an honest arbiter here, and he will go through and say, does he have at least 5.5? So are you taking the over? Or you're taking the under? 5.5 knockdowns for Ikem Ekwonu in this game against Florida State.
I'm going to go the over. I love that guy, and I don't want to root for the under for offensive lineman knocking people to the ground. I want to root for the over. So over.
For that reason, I think I will go the over as well. The way you put it is perfect. Like I'm not rooting for him to get less, so I will go the over here. That'll be a fun one for Ben to go back and chart for us. Let's go to the next one here. An either or. Who throws, this is a big one, who throws more touchdowns in this game? Malik Willis from Liberty or Matt Corral from Ole Miss? We talked about how earlier in the show, this is a big game for Malik Willis, a big moment. Matt Corral, a little bit banged up coming into this game. And as we're recording this, still not 100% that he's going to play. I'm going to assume that he will play. Who throws more touchdowns in this game, Willis or Corral?
Kind of going back and forth on this one because of Corral's injury status. But I think Ole Miss ultimately wins the game.
Sure.
Coming off that loss. So I guess I'll go with the guy whose team I think scores more points.
Interesting. Corral. I will go. This was a tough one because you're going to make an argument for both ways. I'm going to go Malik Willis here. Obviously, a huge moment for him. Former SEC recruit down at Auburn. And they're obviously, I think that Ole Miss is going to score a bunch of points as well. But I think when you look at Willis, maybe they're playing from behind. They're going to be throwing the ball. They'll be aggressive. I'm going to go Willis here in this pick. I'll go opposite you in this one. Let's go to another big SEC matchup, Texas A&M and Auburn for our high-low. So what is the higher number here in this game, Ross? Isaiah Spiller, the star running back from Texas A&M, potentially the first running back off the board next spring. His yards per carry for Texas A&M, or the margin of victory for Texas A&M over Auburn. Which one do you like here? What's the higher number?
Well, you know me. I think this is a toss-up game, so I'm going Spiller yards per carry because Auburn might win. Yep. I'm just playing the old odds, so to speak.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And Auburn, a surprising victory this past week. I don't know that a lot of people expected them to get that win over Auburn. Texas A&M, they had a tough loss recently after that win over Alabama. I want to make up some ground on you, but I want to be smart here as well. I'm going to go Spiller because I came in wanting Spiller. I don't know if I want to force the issue and go opposite just to go opposite. So we're separate on two separate items, 2 out of 5. We'll see how those fare this weekend. Now let's get to our upset specials, Ross. A bunch of games, a bunch of options for us here in this one. What's an upset that you like here this weekend in college football?
Yeah, I mean, there were several that I looked at. The one I'm going to go with, though, was Northwestern over the Iowa Hawkeyes.
Wow.
Northwestern was able to beat Rutgers a couple weeks ago. Iowa's not playing very well right now. Iowa, the wheels have kind of fallen off. They got smashed by Purdue and Wisconsin. Give me Northwestern.
I'm going to stay in the Big Ten. I'm going to go Illinois over Minnesota. Minnesota continues to pile up some injuries there. They're going to be on their 4th running back now in the starting lineup. They've got some injuries on both sides of the ball. Illinois, we know they had that big upset win over Penn State a couple weeks ago. We were a little bit removed from that, so maybe the emotional come down, that's past. I'm going to go Illinois here over Minnesota. We'll see how that does for me here in the Big Ten. Well, Ross, we'll see if I can catch up some ground on you. Again, a 4-point lead for you coming into the weekend. We'll see how this goes, my friend.
Yeah, I love it. It's so fun to keep track of these every week, man. Hopefully you can not catch up.
Well, great stuff there from Ross Tucker and as well from Ben Fennell, from Eric Galko, and of course from Crissy Froyd. Make sure you tune back in next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Myself, Ben Fennell, Dane Brugler, we're going to break down everything we see this weekend in college football. We'll have another member of the Eagles personnel department on the show early next week. If you're not subscribed, I don't know what to tell you. If you liked what you heard here today on the podcast, make sure you go and hit that subscribe button over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We will see you next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand.